today's topic of discussion is Azure Active Directory. But before we do go ahead and understand what an Active Directory exactly is, let's start by taking a look at today's agenda first. So what do we have here? First and foremost, we would be starting things off by understanding what an Azure Active Directory exactly is and why it is needed. We would also understand what is the difference between Azure Active Directory and Windows Active Directory. We would also understand what are the different audiences this Active Directory caters and discuss what are its different editions. I would also talk about what are Azure Active Directory tenants. Finally, I would finish things off with the demo part. Now, when we talk about the demo, I would be talking about how do you go ahead and create users and how do you go ahead and create an Active Directory. I would also be discussing quite a few other terms as well, but that is for the later part. Let's start by understanding what an Azure Active Directory exactly is. Let us start by taking a look at the definition first. Now, if I talk about the definition, this is what we have. It is Microsoft's multi-tenant, cloud-based directory and identity management service that combines core directory services, application access management, and identity protection into a single solution. Now, there's so many terms in it and so many things to understand. Let me simplify this definition so that you understand it in a much better way. To do that, I would be giving you an example. Think of it in this way. Suppose I am a cloud vendor, or not a cloud vendor, I am a service vendor and I reside on a cloud. That means I have a particular application that runs on cloud. Now, this service is used by quite a few customers. Plus, there are quite a few organizations that I have to interact with. Now, in this case, all these medias or customers and organizations, they have to communicate with me. So how do they do it? Well, what they would do is they would go ahead and create an account or maybe have some user IDs through which they can actually communicate with me. Now, this is okay if the number is countable or manageable. Suppose there was a situation where we had n number of people and the number of people was constantly increasing. Suppose I have somewhere around 1000, 2000 people. Now, these many logins and these many credentials, managing all these can be a huge problem. Let me give you an example. How does this happen exactly, or what problems do you face normally? Suppose I have 10 organizations. Now, to log into all these or give access to all these 10 organizations can be a huge problem. Why? All these organizations might have different kind of accesses. Based on that, I have to set in different security protocols as well. If certain organizations have an easier protocol, what if they get an access to other organizations as well, or to the data that other organizations have to correspond to? In that case, it can be a huge problem. Apart from that, I might have n number of customers, and keeping track of so many customers can again be a problem when you talk about creating credentials. So all this is a huge problem. So what happened was Microsoft Azure, it went ahead and created something called as Azure Active Directory. It is nothing but something that acts as a middleware. It takes care of all the sign-ins and all these things. How? Now the users will have a single sign-on process. That means they would sign in only once. Plus, they can have access to the applications that are there, which I provide them. Now, this intermediary, that is your Active Directory, what it does is it federates all the responsibilities of taking care of access and all those things. That is, the way I set all the rules, it just incorporates those rules and accordingly it gives access to all the users, thus simplifying all the complexities that I would face otherwise. So this is what an Active Directory exactly is. It basically goes ahead and simplifies all the signing in and user authentication processes, or identification processes rather. Now, as we move further, we would be discussing quite a few other terms and you'd be having a clearer picture as to what I'm saying exactly. But meanwhile, you just bear with me and let's move further and try to understand what are the other points that we need to talk about. Okay, yes, I did miss out on this point. What Microsoft Azure does is it also gives you something called as a better platform where developers can develop their applications with a lot more ease. Again, as we move further, we'd be understanding this point as well. So what is the exact difference between Windows AD and Azure AD? Let's try to understand that as well. Now, when you talk about Windows AD, that is Active Directory, these are the layers it has to take care of. You have something called as your domain services, you have your lightweight directories, you have your federation services, certificate services, and rights management services as well. Now, these are so many things to take care of. When you talk about your Active Directory with Microsoft Azure, it combines all these layers into two. Firstly, you have your Windows Azure Active Directory. Now, it is something that takes care of all the services that surround or revolve around identity problems. That is, when you talk about identification management, this is the part that takes care of it. That is your WAAD. And then we have the other part where you have to actually go ahead and communicate with other organizations. I gave you an example of 10 different organizations needing 10 different things. That is federating all these organizations. Your Windows Azure Access Control Services, it takes care of all those things. So both these so-called Active Directories, they more or less serve similar purposes, but the approach in which they do is completely different. Your Active Directory has more layered approach where every service is given a different layer or different way of handling it. But when you talk about your Microsoft Azure Active Directory, it simplifies things. Your first layer takes care of most of the things, and the remaining things are something that is taken care by a Windows Azure Access Control Service. Also, when you talk about Active Directory, it uses something called as LDAP for various other communications. But when you talk about your Azure Active Directory, here you use something called as your REST APIs. Again, the approach is completely different. So what are the audiences that are catered by this directory? Well, first and foremost, we have IT admins. Now, when I talk about IT admins, what Microsoft Azure Active Directory does is it provides in single sign-on for various applications. Now, there are quite a few SaaS applications, that is software as a service applications, and various on-premise applications to which you have a single sign-on. You do not have to log in every now and then. Now, I've worked on quite a few applications and places where you have to log in every now and then. You have a lot of trouble because you have to remember so many passwords and so many logins, and these different credentials can be a problem. Now, this is something your Microsoft Azure takes care of. Single sign-on is very convenient. Apart from that, it ensures strong identification, and there are quite a few processes that ensure this. Now, I won't be discussing those points in detail, but yes, when you talk about identification, Microsoft Azure ensures that it happens in a very good manner. Plus, it automates quite a few processes, again easing up this process. Apart from that, it also caters quite a few developers as well. Now, I'm talking about quite a few organizations, and since sign-on becomes easier here, your application developers can focus on building applications. And since they have access to so many organizations and so many resources, application development definitely becomes easier. Online customers. Now, people who have been working for quite a while, they might know that we have things like Office 365, or you have your CRM services as well. Now, you had an access to all these things by using your Windows Active Directory, but your Microsoft Azure Active Directory also gives you access to all these services. That means if you're using or have account on any one of these things, you can have access to all these services or have access to all the Active Directory services that Azure has to provide to you. So what this does is it caters the needs of various online customers as well. So let us try to understand the next point, that is Azure Active Directory editions. For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch into the Microsoft's web page basically, or I'm going to switch into my browser and move to their website and talk about all these points. So instead, what I would do is I would first discuss the last point. And before we do go ahead and take a look at the demo, then we would just go ahead and talk about these points as well so that we can directly switch into the demo part. So let's move further and try to understand the next point and then come back to this point. So what are tenants basically? Now, when you talk about a tenant, it is nothing but an organization. I just mentioned that we have tens of organizations that a particular application might cater. Now, all these organizations are treated as tenants. All these tenants can have access to a particular Active Directory or more than one Active Directory. As we move into the demo part, I would be talking about how to create multiple directories as well. Yes, we can have more than one Active Directory. We'll discuss that as we move into the demo part. But before that, you just understand these points as in what I'm trying to say exactly. Yes, what happens here exactly is when you talk about a tenant, first and foremost, it is nothing but an organization, and it is a dedicated instance of your Azure Active Directory service. Plus, these are isolated instances. That means, as I've mentioned, we have 10 organizations or 5 organizations. You'd be having isolated instances for each of these organizations, ensuring that they stay aloof and their services and their protocols are maintained differently. This is where your Azure Active Directory steps in. It takes care of all these things. It ensures that nothing is ambiguous or nothing is intermixed. Everything stays separate. Plus, each and every platform or organization gets serviced equally well. As we move further, we would be creating users, and then I would give you the differences as in what a tenant is, how do you go ahead and create all the domains and all those things. So again, into the demo part, you'd be understanding these topics with little more clarity or more understanding rather. This is the demo part, but before that, as I've already mentioned, let me quickly switch to the website of Microsoft Azure, and I would be discussing the editions that you can choose from, and then we can directly jump into the demo part. Okay guys, so this is a Microsoft doc basically which talks about choosing an edition. So these are the options you have. We would be finishing this quickly and then we would be switching into the demo part. So let's understand this. Now, what Microsoft Azure does is it gives you various options. First and foremost, you have three options to pick from. And out of these three options, the first one is your basic option, that is your Active Directory basic. Then you have your premium, which is P1. And then you have one more premium, which is P2. All these things provide you with different options that you have. First and foremost, your main job is to have your access, that is your identity management, your security, and your single sign-on and all those things. Now, these are some of the services that come with your basic account as well, and also with your free account. What Microsoft Azure does is, for people who are completely new to this session and Microsoft Azure, let me tell you that you have a free sign into Microsoft account. That means you can go ahead and create your account there and avail these services for a certain duration, which are available to you for free. So yes, you do not have to pay anything. There you have a free account. In that, you'll be having access to some of these services. But if you need advanced services, then you have to pay for it. And for those things, you have three options. That is your basic, premium P1, and premium P2. Let's try to understand these one by one, as in what are these and what do they have to offer to you. Now, if you scroll down and if you take a look at this thing, you have your Azure Active Directory Basic now. This basic is nothing but it is designed for people who are task workers or who are focused on a particular application on cloud. Now, it takes care of everything, your single sign-ons, your SLAs, and it ensures that the security is 99.9%. And it provides you with all these features which you can see here, that is your self-service password resets and all those things. You also have access to quite a few things like your proxies and all those things. I won't be getting into the details of what proxies are and all those things. But yeah, for people who are admins and who have worked on these topics or in these domains, they would understand what do these things mean. So yep, you have access to all these things which fall under your basic option. Apart from that, you have something called as your premium P1. Now, this is for people who want to scale up. So when you try to scale up, you'd be dealing with quite a few things, and terms like your IAM and all those things would come into picture. Now, IAM is nothing but your identity and access management basically, which is a very important point when you talk about Active Directories. So yes, it provides you with these things as well, or these facilities as well, like identity protection, your security in the cloud, and all those things. Everything is taken care of for this particular model. Now, when you talk about premium P2, if I scroll down, this is what you have. It is designed for more advanced protection. That means you'd be getting all the services that were provided in basic and P1. Apart from that, you'd be having some additional services which ensure more security. That means it focuses more on privileged identity management. Now, again, this is something that you can read and understand. It is very easy, but to give you a basic difference, your first thing provides you with your basic services. That is, your basic access gives you basic Active Directory service access. Then you have your premium version, which is focused for scaling up. And when you talk about P2, it focuses more on advanced security. So these are the three different editions that you can choose from. Now, if you're somebody who is belonging to a particular organization and wants to go ahead and use these services, he can actually go ahead and read all these things and then go ahead and take a decision accordingly. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to go ahead and switch into the demo part. For that, I need to go ahead and open my Microsoft Azure account. So let's do that. Well, my internet is kind of slow today, so it might take a little longer while than normal. I can click here on portal and there you go. It would ask me to sign in. I would be using a dummy account today for this so-called demo. I wanted to give you an access to or view to quite a few directories and all those things. So that is why I did go ahead and create an account and or certain Active Directories created or basically certain accounts created. Now, this is how the Azure portal looks like for people who are completely new. Again, you have your dashboard here. Apart from that, you can actually go ahead and create quite a few things. That is your virtual machines, your data factories, and all those things. For people who want to know all those things, they can actually go ahead and refer the other videos that are there in this series, and you'd know quite a few other things as well. But as far as this session goes, we are here to talk about Active Directory. So let's head into it and try to understand how do you go ahead and create Active Directories and all those things. Now, how do you navigate to a particular Active Directory? Now, if you scroll down here, you'd be seeing an Active Directory here. For people who have an account on Microsoft Azure and have access to all these things, they would have an Active Directory by default. So you just have to come here and click on it, and a particular dashboard would open up for you people as well. Now, this is how it looks like. You have all these things, an overview, getting started. You have users, groups, which you can manage and monitor. You have devices you can connect to, your various app registrations. As I've told you, you can manage multiple applications as well. Now, in that case, what happens is, as I've mentioned, you might be dealing with multiple applications. So a particular user, what applications should he have access to? What domains does he have access to? What are the devices that are configured? all these things can be controlled or managed from here basically. So this is what your so-called Active Directory does. Now let's move further and try to create some users. Now how do we do that? Well, I can click on this icon here and it would give you the list of users that are already there. As you can see, there are quite a few users here. This was a demo account, so we did go ahead and create so-called users so that you can have a look at them. This is something that I created yesterday, that is Chris Pratt. Now how do you go ahead and create an account? I would be talking about all these things. To give you a start, you have to click on this thing, new users, and this window opens up. Now again, I'll have to go back and show you something else. How do we deal with all these things? Well, first and foremost, you need to give in a pseudonym or a name of the person for which you want to create a user. Apart from that, you need a particular domain name, or yes, a domain name for a particular domain service. Now, how do we get that? Now, these domain services have to be registered with your so-called Azure Active Directory. So I have these accounts here, right? So I can use one of these accounts to just go ahead and create a particular user. Suppose I want that user to be assigned or maybe associated with this ID. So I can select this domain service extension basically. Again, click on new user. So what name should I give to this particular user? Now, I am a huge cricket fan and recently I watched England's match. So let's pick name of one of the players that belongs to England team. Say Sam Billings, and again this is where I would be creating the user. Say I say Sam Bill as a pseudonym, and I give in this domain details, that is at edureka.tk. Now this is something that is configured already, that is why I can use it and I can have an account. If I used an ID that was not registered with this Azure account, I wouldn't have been able to create this user because it would have given me a particular error. As we move further, we would be taking a look at that as well. But for now, let's go ahead and create a legitimate user, that is this one. Now it verifies whether the name is proper or not. Name is something you can use in any which way you want to, but your username has to be legit and valid. So I have these details which I've entered. Configuration not required, properties can be default, and if I have to assign him a role, I can click here. You can see the name is verified here as well. Let's make him a global admin maybe. And again, you'd be given a password here. If you say show, it would show you the password, and I would suggest that you note it down because you would be required to go ahead and log in, and in that case you might be needing this password. So a suggestion that you note it down. I say okay here and I create the user. Now it might take a while because at times there are certain things that take a while, but in this case it has happened pretty quickly. So as you can see, we've gone ahead and created a user. His name was Sam Billing if I'm not wrong. So yes, there you have this account which is Sam Bill. And if you click on it and open it, you can have access to that account where you can enter in other details, what applications that are there under this user and what applications do you want to assign, which devices do you want to configure, and all those things. If you scroll down, you have some other options as well, sign-ins and audit logs. Now I won't get into the details of these things, but you can assign all these things to this particular user as well. So yeah, this is what the user looks like, and you can actually go ahead and log into this Azure account through this user profile as well. We can do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create or open an incognito window where I'm going to go ahead and log in as this user. Let's just say incognito. And now if I try to log in, I would have to enter in the details. I've actually gone ahead and tried logging in, but I've forgotten the credential details. So let me just quickly switch to this window, copy this email ID and again switch here. So this is the email ID which we have, Sam Bill, next. And my password was, I hope it is right. Yes, so when you log in for the first time, it would ask you to enter the current password. And then you can enter the new password, let's say, and then you re-enter the password. There you go, and you sign in. So what happens is you enter into this portal as a fresh user. See, I'm a completely new user and it says, do you want to start a tour? But I don't want to do that, so I would just say maybe later. There you go. You have your fresh dashboard. There is nothing pinned here and everything is completely new. So yep, you've entered in as a completely new user. And this is the Active Directory where I'm assigned to. That is my previous Active Directory. As you can see, this is what we have here to offer. So yes, as a user, I have certain privileges and I can have access to this so-called portal. So this is something I wanted you all to see. There are quite a few other things which we are going to go ahead and take a look at it. But for now, let me just log out and close this tab. Now I'm back here. The other things I want you to understand, and those things are, if I come here, what you can say is we have certain users here, right? There you go. Now, if you take a look at certain email IDs, you can see these email IDs. Now, these are quite huge email IDs, right? What happens is when you do go ahead and register your domain service, you register that domain service with Microsoft Azure account. And when you do go ahead and create users, you would not want to have such use names. That is, say, for example, Vishal at Microsoft something, 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 something. That can be long, right? And that is complicated to handle or manage. So instead, what you can do is you can provide them with pseudo identities or pseudo IDs as well, so that the process becomes easier or simpler to handle. Let's try to do that and see how can we do that. Can we just go ahead and assign a particular domain name or a domain service when we just go ahead and create a new user or all those things? So in order to add a particular domain, what you have to do is you have to go ahead and again, where is my Active Directory? Here it is. And I just kind of scroll down. You can see custom domain names where you can actually go ahead and add domain names, but there are certain catches to it. Let's try to understand those. Now it would ask me to enter a custom domain name and I say demo domain maybe. Yeah. And let me give it some extension. Now, again, let me tell you that this is a demo practice and it won't take in this particular domain name. I'll tell you why. But first, let's just try to add this domain. Yeah, the domain name is added. But as you can see, to use demo domain.add with Azure AD, create a new text record with your domain name registrar using the info below. So if I say text, I need to copy this part and I have to actually go ahead and add this to my particular domain name. Now, I won't be going ahead and doing that because that is something that we are not discussing here, because for that we would be needing some other domain name which I do not have right now with me. So if you do go ahead and try to add a particular domain name, you need to have that particular domain. That is, suppose I'm using a particular website or I have a particular organization which has a particular website or a domain name that is xyz at xyz.com or something like that. So I need to make sure that I go ahead and register or have access to that particular domain, and then I need to go ahead and attach this particular text to it or authorize this text with it so that I can actually go ahead and confirm with Microsoft Azure that yes, I have an access to that particular domain, and only then can I go ahead and use this particular domain with my Microsoft Azure. Now if I click here on verify, it would give me an error that I'm very sure of. See, could not find the DNS record for this domain. DNS changes may take up to 72 hours to propagate. That means I have 72 hours to go ahead and add this particular text message to that domain, and so that I can verify that yes, this domain is legal. But in this case, it isn't. I just took something for the demo purpose or for the reference sake, and this is the domain that I might have or which I can actually go ahead and use. So yeah, this is how you actually go ahead and add a particular domain, and you can actually go ahead and create a user as well. What you have to do is when you do go ahead and register this particular domain, you can just go ahead and follow the processes like creating a user, which we did in the previous case, because that was the registered domain. When I used that so-called edureka.tk, it was registered with my so-called Azure account, and I could actually go ahead and register that particular user. But in this case, I cannot. But yes, if you do go ahead and create a particular domain, or you want to go ahead and create a particular domain or register a particular domain, make sure that it is valid and it is under use, and you can actually go ahead and register that particular domain by using this particular process. So yeah, this is how you actually go ahead and do all these things. Now, when you have this particular domain, which is not registered, and if you do go ahead and create a particular user on it, what happens is your Microsoft Azure would let you create that user, but the credentials or the access that user has is as a guest user, because your Microsoft isn't sure that this domain which you just created is actually registered or something that you can actually go ahead and use. So that is one point which you need to consider. Now let me just quickly go back to my Active Directory and see if there are anything or any points that I need to discuss with you or something that we have missed upon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about something else called as creating an Active Directory, or can we create multiple Active Directories? That is a question. If you ask me, I would say yes, definitely you can create multiple directories. Now, as you see here, if I go to a particular directory, I would be having an option called as switch directories. Now, if I click here, I have certain options from which I can pick a default directory. Now, in my case, I have quite a few directories which I can actually go ahead and choose from. But I want to give you all a demo as in how do you go ahead and create one, because these are something that we have created for the practice purpose or certain usage purpose. So let's go ahead and create a fresh one. So how do we do that? Can we just go ahead and create one? Well, yes, definitely we can create one. If you just scroll down, you have certain options here. we had an option of creating a new directory. Let me just go ahead and see where that option is. See, yes, this option, create a directory. So let's start by giving it certain names, say Edureka 1234. Not 1234, let's call it say Edureka, maybe. Is it there? Yep. And what should be the domain name? Edureka 121. Edureka 121. State, well, since I'm from India, let's stick to India. And I say create. Now it might take a couple of minutes when you just go ahead and create this so-called directory. So yep, meanwhile you bear with me. And there you go, you have your directory here. You can just click on this thing to manage your directories. As you can see, it's a completely new directory, which is fresh and new to use. That means, as you can see, it's Edureka. And if you click on any one of these things, you won't be having anything else. Now, in my previous Active Directory, I had so many users. And if you come here, you'd see there's just one user, main admin. I do not have anything else or no other user whatsoever. That means this is a fresh directory. Like as you can see, if you just go back to the Edureka option, you'd be having an option of resetting your so-called directory, and you can do that as well. But I do not want to do that for now. I can just click on this and I go back. See, here's the option. You can click on it and you can switch the user. So yeah, you can use multiple directories and you can have multiple users for these directories as well. Now I can just go ahead and create users for this directory as well, but I won't be doing that. Now, since I do not need this directory, I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. So I click on this icon. I do not have permissions probably, so I click on it and I ensure that permission is granted. I say yes and I save changes. It might take half a minute to update these properties, or if the internet is slow, it might take longer as well. There you see the changes have been updated. Now if I refresh this thing, the access is given to me. I can just, I don't want to delete the dashboard. I just want to go ahead and delete my so-called Active Directory. So I do not have an access to my domain services, because of which I'm not able to delete this account. But yeah, you normally have an option where you can actually go ahead and delete this directory. So yep, you can go ahead and do that as well. So yeah, this was the demo about Active Directory, as in how do you go ahead and create a user, how do you create a particular domain space or domain service basically, how do you go ahead and create multiple Active Directories.
We want to know about what is DevOps, what are the services available in Azure to handle the DevOps. So let's first learn about what is DevOps. All right, so first thing is when we say what is DevOps, so basically just for the definition perspective, it's a set of practices intended to reduce the time between committing a change. So let's say you are building an application. If you commit a change, committing this change and taking it to the production is a very long process. But then DevOps means that once you commit a change and finally taking that change to the production, DevOps is something which can help you reduce the overall time and provide you a standard set of practices using which it makes your deployment very, very smooth. Of course, it can help you maintain high quality in your application. This means if you want to do testing, if you want to do some reviews, all these things basically are covered in the DevOps. Some of you guys might be coming from the development background. Some of you might be coming from the operations background. So this is a place where both of us meet together. The developer, the operations guys, they come together and work together. So far in our normal work environments, if we are not into DevOps, what do? The developers have the responsibility of doing some coding, building that, and finally putting it into a source control. Once you put it into a source control, the test team will actually take that source code, do their own builds, and start doing the testing on top of it. Now, once they are doing this testing, they'll do some test stuff, push it back to the development team, and this to and fro keeps happening. Once all this testing is complete, then you put everything into the operations bucket. Then you tell them that, yes, we are done. We have completed everything. Now you go ahead and make a release of it, do the deployment, do the operations on top of it, keep monitoring the stuff. If you face any challenges, then inform the development team. Now, this used to be a very siloed approach. So developers and testers working separately, the operations guys are working separately, and there used to be a lot of friction between these two areas. So now when we come to the DevOps environment, these two set of people, they have actually become one, which means you together do the development, You together put it into the source control, you do the testing, and finally you go ahead, because it's not just individual people, it's a team. So you go ahead and do the release, you do the deployment, and finally do the monitoring, so that you know, because if you have started developing something, you know that what is the best thing you have developed and how you need to handle that. So this is one area where the developers and operations, they come together and work as a team. Friction can be reduced, the time to market becomes faster, and the quality even becomes much better. Do not worry if you do not get the 100% of what is happening, but then the overall idea to understand is that now the developers and the operations, they come together and work together as one single team. Just for this, a very small diagram, the developers, they'll build something, they'll start pushing it to the operations team. So you do the deployment, you take care of everything. The operations, if they'll face any challenges, they'll start pushing it back to the developers team, looking at a very small thing. Okay, if I can solve something very quickly, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll start pushing it back to the developer team, saying that this is not working. So there is a lot of friction and there is a lot of miscommunication that happens in this kind of environment. Way to solve it is that both of us, the developers and the operations, work together as a team. Okay, I hope you got some glimpse of what is DevOps. And now we're going to talk about some tools which are available in DevOps. When we say DevOps, each of these areas are covered by different kinds of tools. So if you are doing some development, you might use, let's say, Eclipse, you might use, let's say, Visual Studio, you might use Visual Studio Code, and then you are checking in your code in TFS, Team Foundation Services. You might be checking in your code in Jira, in Git, or a lot of different repositories. Now, this is one area. Of course, if you have to do some builds, you can use a Kudu server, you can use Maven, you can use Gradle. So all these different tools are used to build your applications. Finally, if you are done building your code and if you have done all the check-ins, then the testing happens. You might be using Selenium, or JUnits to do the testing of your applications. Now, again, you can see here all these different areas require different kinds of tools. And if you are releasing something, then of course you can use Jenkins and Bamboo to release your stuff. Finally, you do the deployment. All right, so there are different tools to do the deployment, and then you do the operations, which means your operations team is sitting there and doing all these operation stuff, and they are monitoring this stuff using different tools. When we say that we want to build a DevOps platform, we want all these tools, what you see here, to work together so that you can do this activity without having to do any manual intervention. Okay, and this is where we are going to spend our time into looking at how these tools can be used when we go to Azure DevOps. I guess you guys have learned about what is Azure, some basic stuff, and what is DevOps. Now we are going to look into, if I have to do all this DevOps activity in Azure, okay, so what is it that is available to us? And now let's learn about what is Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps is something which is providing us all the set of tools integrated into one single environment. This means that if you know how to work with Eclipse, if you know how to work with TFS, if you know how to work with Git, Selenium, all these different tools, then you can use Azure DevOps. Or in fact, in my case as well, I didn't know, a lot of tools, but still when I started learning about Azure DevOps, I started learning about all these things as well. So you don't have to worry that if you are not a part of any of these particular areas, for example, if you're not part of right now how to do the deployment, or if you're not part of how to do monitoring and you are on the developer side, or basically you are into the development side, then you don't have to worry that will I be able to use DevOps or not? So the answer to that is yes, you will be able to use the DevOps, or in fact, that will help you move towards the DevOps, even if you know maybe a couple of parts of it. So now we are going to talk about what are different components of Azure DevOps. And once we'll see some demos, you will be very clearly able to understand how you can take your application from the planning stage up to the deployment and monitoring stage using the tools in Azure. Okay, so let's learn about what are different components of Azure DevOps which are available. Now, let me just show you all 5 actually. So there are 5 different components which are available as part of Azure DevOps. First thing that we need to know is about Azure boards. There are people who come from the Scrum background. They are coming from the project management background. They know how to create some features. They know how to create epics. They know how to create the stories. They know how to create tasks and all that stuff. And then there are developers who themselves go and create the task on which they are going to work. And there are testers who just want to create some test cases. And after the test cases are done, they want to create the bugs which they find in the system. Now, all these activities can be done as part of the Azure boards. Number two is, of course, after you have done all the planning, after you have created all the epics, all the features, all the stories, tasks, and everything, second thing you want to do is development. For example, you start doing development in TFS, you start doing development in Eclipse. Any ID that you want to use, you can do the development. Once you are done with the development, now you want to push all this into a source control. Now, this is where Azure repos will come in and it will help you store all the information. So in the source control, you check in your code. And Azure repos is a place which provides us with a lot of different repositories. In fact, right now it's two. If you want to use Team Foundation services, or if you want to use Git. So basically you can provision that in Azure repos and you can start checking your application code in Azure repos. So again, we are going to see all these things in action today. The third thing is, once you have checked in your code, what do you want to do next? So there are two things that you want to do. First thing is that you want to run something called as a build pipeline. When you have checked in your code, you want to make sure that nobody has checked in some wrong code. So this is where you build your code. Of course, the developers have the responsibility to build the code on their local machines. This is not a good practice. Now, if developers is just building it on their local machine, this means that maybe some of the dependencies on that machine are not correct, or maybe it's not in sync with the other team members. So this means that if person says that, yes, it is building on my machine and I just want to push it in the source control, is that good? The answer is no. Because this means that if somebody will have a special dependency in the application which is installed locally, but it's not installed, for everyone. For others, when they will download that code, it will fail. So that is why whenever the developers push something in the repos or basically in the source control, it is going to be taken by the Azure pipeline. It is going to do something called as a build. Okay. So the building of code happens in the Azure pipeline. Now, next thing is the build has already happened. What do we need to do next? The next thing we need to do is release this code. Now I can release it in the dev environment. I can release it in, let's say, pre-prod or UAT environment, or I can also release this stuff in production environment. But normally what do? If developers check in something, we do the build of the code and then we release it in the dev environment. Now, once it goes to the dev environment or maybe in a test environment, it is going to run. After it run completes, then you would want to run some kind of, some test on top of it. Let's say if you have deployed a web service. So if you have deployed a web service, you would want to test if it's behaving correctly. Or if, let's say, you have deployed a web application, you want to check if everything is looking fine in that web app or not. So there you can run manual test cases, automated test cases. You can even do the exploratory testing. All that stuff can be done as part of the Azure test plans. All right. And finally, once all this test plans is done, we can again use basically the pipelines to release something to different environments like UAT, production, and all that stuff. While all these things are going on, there are a lot of things you can configure like workflows, or in fact, let's say approval workflow. So if you are checking in something, you want to make sure the review happens. So that can be taken care in the Azure repos. If you are releasing something to the UAT environment, you need, let's say, an approval from your team lead, or you need an approval from the program manager. So all these approvals are by default built in into all these services. Now, one thing which I haven't touched upon is Azure artifacts. Now, this is something, for example, let's say you have got 10 projects and all these 10 projects have got common dependencies. It may not be common in all, but let's say 3 projects are using one dependency, 5 projects are using some other dependency. So what you can do, you can collect all these dependencies and put it into a one single location called Azure artifacts. So I'm going to show you a few of these things in demo today, that how you can use Azure boards, Azure repos, Azure pipelines, and of course, I'm not going to touch in the demo on test plans and artifacts. Now, I hope everybody understood this overall infrastructure. We have got Azure boards to create our work items. We have got Azure repos to store our code. We have got Azure pipelines, which can help us do the build of the code, release of the code into a particular environment. Then we have got Azure test plans, which we can use to do our testing, which could be manual test cases, automated test cases, exploratory testing. All that can be done as part of the Azure test plans. And finally, if you have got some common DLLs or common jar files, which you want to store it as part of your repository, then you can use Azure artifacts. Now let's look at some of the more things. Now, first thing, as I said, is Azure boards. So we have got 5 different components as part of Azure Boards. All right. So as I said earlier, Azure Boards is a service for managing the work of your software project, which means you want to create some, let's say, epics. You want to create some features, basically some tasks, some product backlog items. You want to create some bugs. All this can be handled in Azure Boards. So you can set up that I want to follow the agile process. I want to follow the Scrum process. I want to use the Kanban. So all these things are available as part of the Azure Boards. So it does not matter that what kind of process you want to follow. I know that a lot of people know about agile. So guys, I'm also an agile and safe certified. So I know there are different processes, and all these different processes can actually being handled by Azure Boards. So what you can do, you can go ahead and create work items. Then you can have the backlogs. Now I'm going to tell you what is a work item and what is a backlog. And then we have Azure Boards. In fact, board is something where basically you can run some queries and see that what is something in a particular sprint, or let's say what are the tasks which are active, or what are the tasks which are closed. If you just want to say that what were the tasks which were released in this particular sprint. So all this information you can get it from the boards. Next thing is about sprints. Now, let's say a sprint is of 15 days. So in 15 days, what are the work that we are going to accomplish? So those things, or basically those tasks or features, they go into sprints. All right. And finally, we have the dashboards, which can help you have the overall picture of what is the progress of your particular sprint, or what is the overall progress of a particular release. Okay, so this is what is covered as part of the Azure Boards. We can just talk slightly more on this, and then we'll see that in the demo. Now, what do we see here? We have got work items, pretty simple stuff. Create, let's say, you can see here, this is a bug being created. This is a user story which is created, or basically the backlog item which is created. Then we have the tasks which are getting created. And the same way, we have got features, we have got epics, which we can create as part of the work items. Then we have got boards. So you can see that what is basically the particular flow of your current sprint, or what is the flow of your project. Of course, we have got backlogs. Now we can arrange what do we want to do as part of the backlog. How do you want to prioritize your different work items so you can deliver your software on time? Next thing is about sprints. If you guys have not worked with sprint, so do not worry, because we don't want to go into the what are the details of sprints. But then sprint is basically, let's say, a small time boxed window in which you can go ahead and deliver a particular part of your product. In your e-commerce application, if you say that we want to deliver the checkout functionality. So let's say if you are ready to deliver the checkout functionality in 2 weeks as part of the sprint, so your checkout feature or your checkout epic will go inside that particular sprint. So once it goes inside that particular sprint, the whole team starts working towards that particular area. And what they do, they try to complete all that stuff during that 15-day time box window. And that is what you can build as part of the sprints. All right, so then we have the final dashboards where you can see what is the current status of your project. Before we go further and look into other different aspects like pipelines and stuff, I just want to give you a small demo of how you can create the work items, how you can create the backlog items, and how you can use the boards. So let me stop here for a while. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is going to go to something called as dev.azure.com. What you need to do here is, if you're not signed in, it'll ask you to sign up or sign in. And once you sign in, this is the kind of basically the dashboard you will see. What you can do here, the first thing you can do here is create a new project. All right, so let me create one. What do you see here? It is asking me that is it a private project or is it a public project? Now let's say if I want to create a project called my test project 4, I'm not going to create it. It takes some time, to set up everything. But what I can show you here is that now it is asking that what is the version control? So basically, where do you want to keep your source code? Do you want to keep it in Git or do you want to keep it in TFS? Okay, so you can go ahead and select the different version control options which are available. Now, of course, I think with time, they will keep adding more and more, source controls or the version control repositories here, which you can use. But most common ones, which everybody knows, is Git. We also have GitHub, which is again a repository for storing the Git-based version control. Of course, there is something from Microsoft which is available, which is the Team Foundation. If some of you guys have worked before with TFS or the Team Foundation services, this is the one. It is totally up to you. How do you want to store your code? So I'm going to select Git right now. The next thing is about work item process. So if you want to follow the agile process, you can use this one. If you want to use the Scrum process, you can follow this one. Then of course you have got CMMI and a basic one. Now basic is something which does not follow a particular process, but this is something which can help you set up either the agile process or the Scrum process. It's like a kind of a blank template. But if you are comfortable working with agile environment, you can select this one and you can click on create. Now, as soon as you do that, what you will see is something like this one, my test project 3, because I created this one and I added few things here. So I want to show you that. All right. Before we go into inside this particular my test project 3, what are the things you can see here? Something called as Azure boards, which we have already talked about, the repositories, Azure repos. Then we have the Azure pipelines. We have got the test plans, and then we have got the artifacts. The same stuff that we have seen in the slide, it's available on dev.azure.com once you create a project. Now let me go ahead and first of all click on this project. What I've done as part of this project, I am using Agile plus I'm using Git. So I've selected this one and this is now showing up in my test project 3. The first thing, as I told you, that I want to show you about is boards. Now let me go here. On the left hand side, you can see boards, repos, pipelines, test plans, and artifacts. So I'm going to go inside boards right now and straight away show you what you can do in the boards. First thing is, of course, pretty simple. If you want to do the planning, so what do? You create something called as a, let's say a task, or basically you create a work item. Now work items are of different types. You can have something called as an epic. Now epic is something which is very, very high level. So let's say your leadership team comes up and they define something called as an epic. Now they will say that we want to deliver this kind of project. All right. So there they are defining a particular epic. Now inside the epic, what you can do, your product owners or let's say your project managers, they will go ahead and decide on the number of features that you want to have as part of the epic. Let's say you want to build an e-commerce site. So in e-commerce site, the business says that we want to set up some e-commerce setup for our this business. That's an epic. Once you go inside that epic, you will say that I want to create a feature. Now what is a feature here? I want to deliver the cart functionality. I want to deliver the product page. I want to have a recommendation engine, or maybe I want to have a search engine in my e-commerce portal. Now, this is what will be created by product owners, or they will be created by the project managers. Now, when you say I want to create, let's say, a search service in my e-commerce site. So as part of the search service, what do you need? You will go ahead and create some stories. So in the story, what will you say? You will say that I want to have some database ready, which will contain all the information of my products. Then I'm going to have, let's say, one more story for building up a middle layer, which can help me, building some APIs, which can help fetch this information from my database and show it to the end users. Then I'll build another story to say that I want to show it to the end customers. And once you have these user stories, then you go ahead and create task inside that particular story. So let me start building up, let's say, one feature. I'm not going to, go into the complete agile model, but right now I'm just saying that we want to create a feature for, let's say, search in e-commerce. Okay. Just remember, guys, this is not the way we write in agile format. So if you want to, just create a new feature, there is a particular format in which you should create the feature. Basically, the text has to be in a particular format, but that's not the agenda for today. The agenda is to show you that you can create a new feature. You can provide a particular iteration path. This means I want to do it in this particular time frame. Okay, I can create multiple iterations. Okay, and I can put up the iteration here. Now, next thing, what I can do here, I can link it to some existing item. All right, so we'll do it later, but then we'll say what is the business value of this, what is the time criticality, what is the start date, what is the target date which we want to complete this particular feature. This feature is new right now, so let me save it. You can go ahead and provide description. You can use the discussion board to do some discussion on top of this particular feature. And once you are final that yes, our feature details are ready, then what is the next thing? Let me go back to work items. And let's say I want to create a particular user story. What will I do? I'll say that I want to create, let's say in the search, I want to create the APIs. And what do I need to do? I need to link it to the epic. Or in fact, I'll need to link it to the feature. On the right side, add link, existing item, And I can also say that what is the parent here? So the parent is, we search for it. So the parent is search in e-commerce. Okay. So I'm going to link this one and say that I'm creating a user story. Let me save it. In fact, you can see that if you know about what is story pointing, so you can add story points here. Or in fact, let me tell you this. If you go for, for any kind of course, or not just from here, but if you go for any kind of course about how do you handle agile, so there you will learn more about story pointing. So you can also provide the risk. Let's say this is a medium risk. What is the priority here? All these kinds of setup you can provide here, that you want to do some architectural thing, or you want to, is it a business feature? All this information is provided as part of the user story. So let me save this one. Go back to the work items. So right now this is showing us separately, but once we'll go to the boards, let me go to the backlogs first. What you will see here, all the different stories which are available. Now this is something on which we want to work. Let me add one more story here, new work item, and let's say UI for search. Okay, let me add this one. Now what you see here is we have created now two stories. In the first sprint, or basically in the planning side, let me just open it up. And so as part of the iteration, what we are going to do in the first iteration, or let's say in the first 15 days, what we are going to deliver, we are going to deliver API for search service. Or in fact, actually both of them have got into the same iteration. So now you can see here, we have got one story which we are going to cover in iteration one, which is right now the current one, and one story we are going to cover as part of the second iteration. Now, in fact, if you go ahead and add more tasks to it, let's say if I click on, I can even change the priority for this one by dragging and dropping. Now click on API for set service. I can go ahead and click on, or in fact, I can see the whole history of that particular feature, or in fact, that particular user story. I can also go to this particular link and I can say that I want to add some child items here. Okay, so I can say add a new item, and that is a child item, which is of type task. And then I can say that I need to do some basic setup, or maybe let's say some design of my search service. So that is one task I'm creating. All right, so what is the original estimate for creating this particular task? I can say 10 hours. What is the remaining time? 10 hours. Completed 0. And I'll provide some description here and save it. So this means if I close this one, and in fact, I'll just refresh this page, you will get a complete idea of what are the tasks which are, or what are the stories on which you are going to work on, or basically what are the backlog items on which you are working in, and what are the tasks under that. So this is the kind of thing that you can set up with Azure DevOps. I hope this stuff is clear to you guys. So we have got different iterations. Let me click on sprints. So you can see right now, the first iteration is going on and the design is here. Once I start working on this, I can even use the visual editor to make it active. Once this stuff is done, I can even move it to the resolved state. Okay, let me just open this one. I can just close this task and say that's it. So this is how my overall flow of basically the work items work. Now, next thing which I want to show you is repositories. Repositories, we mentioned that we can use either Git or we can use TFS to basically maintain our source code. I'm just going to show you a demo right now to show you how all this stuff works. So what you will do here, you can set up a repository, which is like a Git or a TFS. Then you can go ahead and start checking in your code. What first thing you will see here is, because we are using Git, so I'm clicking on something called as branches. And in the branches, there is a default branch which is always available. Now that's called as a master branch. In fact, you can go ahead and create more branches. In some of the source controls like TFS, you will have one single place where everybody is checking in the code. Now, in case of Git, it does not work the same way. It's a very different structure. So what you do is you create your own branch. You work in that branch, which means branch is basically a copy of a master branch. So you will go inside that branch, you will make your check-ins. Now that is your branch in which you are making the changes. You will do the testing. Once you are completely fine that everything is running fine, then you are going to push those changes from your branch to the master branch. Remember that if you haven't worked with Git before, so there is nothing to worry about because this is not something specific to Azure DevOps. What I'm talking right now about the branches, this is something specific to the Git. So let me show this thing that we have right now, a default master branch. If I'll click on this one, what you will see, I have already checked in one particular project into my repository. Okay, that's called as a web application 2. If I click on this one, it's a very simple MVC application that I've created and added it into the source control. I'll go to the Visual Studio. Now in the Visual Studio, you can again see that I am using Git tools for Visual Studio. And this is showing me that I have got a master branch. Now what I can do, let me create one more application and check that in. So let me create a simple application, file, new project, ASP.NET Core Web Application. Remember, you can use Eclipse, you can use IntelliJ, or you can use any other IDE to do the development. Okay, so this is not restricted to .NET or Visual Studio. You can use any kind of platform or any framework to build your application, or it can be in any IDE. Eclipse, IntelliJ, anything will work here. All right. So what I'm going to do is create a new application called Web Application 3. Let this application be created. All right. Now that we have created our application, what do we need to do? You can see here that my project is ready. I'm going to simply push this code into the source control. Okay, how do I do this? Let me first of all ignore a few of these items. And what I'm going to do is, okay, I'm going to stage these items now. This is something very specific to Git. So if you are not comfortable with Git, do not worry because this is something you can learn very quickly. All right. So what do I have here? I have got my full application, which is Web Application 3. I can go ahead and check in into a Git repository, which is managed by Azure DevOps. So I'm going to say checking in Web Application 3. Okay. Also, I can actually go ahead and map it to a work item. Let me click on this one and go back to portal to my work item. In fact, we do not have a work item for development. Let's create one. So UI for search service. Let's go back to the links. I hope you guys remember now. You can click on add link, new item, and let's say we call it build web app 3. Okay, let's call it create. I know this is not the way we write the task, but just to give you an idea that I'm just creating a new task called create web app 3. That's it. So it is going to give me create web app 3 task is ready. I can click on this one and the task number is 10. Okay, so I'm going to copy this one, go back to Visual Studio, enter the ID of the work item. Okay, so I'm going to say 10 is the ID. And you can see basically the related work item. Now what we are doing here, we are creating a new application. When we are checking in the code, we are also specifying what is the related work item. All right, so let me commit all this stuff in the code, sync it back to the cloud, which means now I have checked in into my local environment. I just want to push these changes into the cloud environment. So again, this is specific to Git. You do not have to worry about this. Just give me a second. I'm just something related to, Git. I need to. Okay, so I think this should work now. We push these changes. Okay, so now this is going to push my changes to the source control. All right, so you can see here it has been successfully pushed to the master branch. If I go back to the DevOps environment, what you will see here, in fact, if I just open up the application as well, so you can see here, this is the parent side. And in fact, let me just refresh this one. Okay, so what you see here in the description, or basically in my history, I can see that I have done some check-in here. So it is linked to that particular check-in. Now you can start visualizing this stuff. So you have got tasks, you have made your check-ins. From those check-ins, it is coming in. Once you make a check-in and attach it to a particular work item, it will be linked to that particular work item. So if anybody is going and looking into what changes you have made as part of this task, you can actually go ahead and see all that stuff. Now this is a part of the task. Next thing is, let's go back to the repos and see the commits. Okay, we have made a commit into the repository. What do we see here? We have got check-in web app 3. Okay, so this is what we have checked in as part of the web application 3 that we just created. Now the next thing is, I want to build this application. Okay, so if you guys remember, the second thing was checking in the source code. After checking in the source code, I want to automatically build this particular code. So what do I need to do here? I need to go to the third component called pipelines. I see something called as builds, which means I want to take up this particular source code and do an automatic build of that. So what I can do, I can click on something called as new build pipeline. I've already got two created, but I just want to show you from scratch how this is done. So where is your code? It is asking me. So my code is present in a Git repository. So I'm going to select this one. And what is asking me that where is your source, okay? Or where is your Git repository, all right? So my repository is in Azure repos Git. Okay, so I'm going to select this one. You can even select GitHub. For example, if you just want to pick up the code from GitHub directly and use it, you can do it here. Or you have the GitHub enterprise server. If you have got GitHub deployed in your local environment or in your enterprise environment, you can use Subversion, or you can, in fact, if you have got TFS, there's a different way to use it. But then right now we are focusing on using the Git in Azure repos. All right. So here you can see it. I have got my test project 3, which is basically my repository and my team project. Then I'm going to pick up all the code from master branch. Okay, so I'm going to click on continue. And the first thing that I need to do is tell Azure how to build my project. So how do I want to build my project? I want to build this project as part of Azure web app. This means I want to take my code and finally I want to deploy it in a service in Azure called Azure Web App. When we say Azure Web App, then I want to build my project as part of the Azure Web App. Okay. So if you want to do a normal build, for example, of your ASP.NET application, you can do it. If you have got an Android project, you want to build it. If you have got Maven, let's say you have a Java project and you want to use Maven to build your projects, you can do it. You have got Python packages. You have got ASP.NET Core. Then we have got, if you have know what is a container, if you want to build Docker containers, you can do it from here. If you want to deploy, basically build and deploy for Azure Kubernetes services, you can do it. Then if you have got just a function, you can build a C# function. You have the Azure Web App for Java. So all these things can be done as part of the Azure build pipelines. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is select a service in Azure. Basically, I want to deploy in this particular service called Azure Web Apps. And that is why I'm going to select this one to build my code. Now, if I have to build my code, what do I need to provide? I need to provide where is my solution. All right, so I'm going to click on this one and tell the system, or basically tell my build pipeline, that it resides in web application 3. Okay, this is my new project that I picked up. I'm going to select this one and click on OK. Then finally provide where is this Azure subscription in which I want to deploy. So I'm going to select this is my subscription in Azure, and what is the name of the app service. Again, there are a few things that we are rushing through. Okay, so this is what we can select. And next thing is I can go ahead and select. So this is what we are going to do. We are going to build as part of the build pipeline. So we are going to take the source code from the Git repository, do a build of it automatically. Let me save this one and queue it, which means I'm going to save this pipeline and start doing the build of my project. So now that our build pipeline is ready, which means our code is going to be get built, let me show you when the build is happening, what is going on. So it is going to take some time to do the build because this is the first time it is happening. But I'm going to show you that I already have one pipeline which is already built for my web application 2, which was very similar. So while this is running, let me go to builds. And this was a pipeline which was completed successfully. So let me select this pipeline. So this is how the build happens. So if you open up anything, it is going to give you the detailed logs of how the build happened. So it picked up the code from your source control, it did a build, and you can see all the build activities which happened as part of this pipeline. So you can see here it picked up the web application 2 project and it started doing the build. It did all the copy files to output directory and cleanup and all that stuff. And finally, it did a build of my project. Now, once I did a build of my project, what next? So you can see here, it approximately took 5 minutes to do the build. So what you can do as part of your Azure DevOps, as soon as somebody checks in the code, it will automatically trigger a build pipeline using which your application will be built. And if there is a failure, then the person will be informed back using a mail that your code is not correct. Okay, so you have to rectify your code as soon as possible. Now, once we have done all this build activity, what next do we need to do? We need to release it to a production environment or maybe to a UAT environment. How do we do that? We do it using something called as releases. So now that this one is ready, either I can click on release and build up a new release pipeline. So let me click on this one. And I'll say I want to create a new release. So I'll click on release 2. And what you will see here, now that the complete build which happened, now it is asking me that where do you want to release it? So I've already created a release pipeline. In fact, let me click on this and let's create a new one as well. Releases, new pipeline. And it is asking me where do you want to do the deployment? So I'm telling Azure that I want to do the deployment in Azure App Services. You can deploy a Java application. You can deploy a Node.js application. You can install it in Service Fabric. You can install it, deploy a Rails on Ruby application on app service. You can deploy an IS website. All right. So all these things you can do. And I'm going to deploy in Azure App Service. All right. So once I select this, I just need to provide what is the application basically which I want to build and what is the Azure subscription in which I want to deploy the application. Let me select this one. So there is one I've already created, my test app service. Once I've done this, I can save it. So this is my release pipeline is ready. So now my code has gone into source control. My build pipeline, which is picking up that source code and building it, that is ready. Now this is my release pipeline, which is going to take that build code and going to do the deployment. Okay. So I can click on here and say create a release and that's it. Or in fact, one more thing I can show you. If I go back to the main pipeline, I can even set up who will approve it before it goes into a particular environment. So I can click, for example, pre-deployment conditions and say who is going to do the pre-deployment approval. If your team lead needs to approve the overall release before it goes into UAT or production, then you can specify who is the approver. So in this case, I'm going to put in my name. All right. And I'm going to save this one. So this means as soon as the deployment will start happening, it is going to ask me for the approval. I'll get an email that please approve the release deployment. Then only it can go to production. So I'm going to click on now create a release and click on create. So go to the release which has been created now. And you can see it is saying pending approval. What I can do is, because right now I am the owner, so I can click on approve and say, yes, I want to basically approve this particular release. And then it will continue further to do the deployment. Now you can see here the approval is done. And right now this is under queue, which means as soon as the resources are available in Azure, it is going to start the release deployment. And while this is right now, it's in a queue state, I can show you the one which I deployed for web application 2. So I'll go back to the releases. Okay, so this one is already done. In fact, not this one, just give me a second. Okay, so this one is already done. So what you will see here, after basically everything is done, or basically the release starts and it starts deploying, you can see the logs here. If there is a failure in your pipeline, it is going to inform you that there is a failure in the release. You will get email, so you can quickly act on that. Otherwise, it will download all your build artifacts. In our case, it was a web application. So it downloaded all the artifacts of my web application and then it is started deploying it to the Azure App Service. Okay, so you can see all the logs. In fact, you can even write custom logs here that this is what we are doing as part of the release deployment on Azure App Service. All right, so you can see here successfully updated the deployment history. App Service application is running at this particular URL, and then you can use this URL. Now, once this release completes, this means our code which we created has been deployed into production. Let me go back to Azure now. Okay, and I'm right now into Azure portal, which you can get from portal.azure.com. You can click on My Test App Service, which we are using for deployment. And if I run this particular app service, which is basically a platform for hosting the websites, or in fact, platform for hosting different websites, APIs, mobile applications. So I can click here and see my application is successfully deployed. So just to summarize all this stuff, now you can see here the application is ready. There are 5 components basically of the Azure DevOps, which means that we have got Azure boards in which you can manage your work items. You can manage the tasks. You can create either the Scrum boards, Kanban boards, or you can have the agile process. All this is being handled as part of the Azure boards. Now, second thing is about Azure repos, where we have got Git and TFS in which you can check in your code and you can manage all the branches. You can manage complete Git functionality, which is available as part of the Azure repos. So you can check in your source code there. The third thing is about Azure pipelines, in which after you have done the check-ins, you can build your solution and you can also release your solution in multiple environments like dev, pre-prod, UAT, production, all that stuff. Next thing is about Azure test plans, which we haven't covered. I just wanted to give you an idea of what is a test plan. So test plan is something where you can run your automated, manual, exploratory testing under Azure test plans. And finally, you have the Azure artifacts in which you can store some dependencies. So this is the overall picture of Azure DevOps.